In a Roman Catholic convent, a nun named Mary plans to run away. At night, after saying her prayers, she sneaks into Sister Superior's bedroom and steals a ring of keys to escape the locked gates of the convent. She reaches the gate and desperately tries to find the right key when she hears footsteps behind her. She turns to see 4 hooded figures march in unison toward her. As if their extreme fashion faux pas weren't scary, they grab hold of Mary, who almost escapes and breaks her leg, which renders her unconscious. When she wakes up, she finds herself trapped in a coffin, buried alive. Sister Cecilia has arrived in Italy to join a convent that tends to dying nuns in their last days after receiving an invitation from Father Sal Tedeschi. Upon her arrival, she is eagerly met by a superior nun accompanied by Sister Isabella, who becomes an unchartered translator and a chaperone for Cecilia. Ignoring the fact that she's unnecessarily passive-aggressive with Cecilia while showing her around, she does soften a bit when they reach the room allotted to her and cryptically suggests that she can still leave and lead a normal life. Cecilia, however, doesn't take the hint and asserts she's there to stay. Cecilia meets Sister Gwen under rather unusual circumstances when Gwen invites herself into the bathroom while she is using it, and unhinged by how awkward the situation is, Gwen casually starts a conversation. In the evening, the ceremony takes place, and Cecilia takes vows to adhere to the evangelical counsels. She becomes a nun and is decorated with a rosary. At the feast, Cecilia talks to Father Sal Tedeschi, who tells her he worked in the field of biology before becoming a priest. Cecilia reveals when she was 12, she fell into a frozen lake and her heart stopped for 7 minutes. However, miraculously, she came back to life, and since then, she believes that God saved her for a purpose, which eventually led her to turn to Christianity. Cecilia excuses herself to freshen up when she hears a sound. Following the sound, she reaches the chapel, where she sees a nun lying on the floor facing down. As she tries to help her, she is shocked to see that the nun has no visible features. Just then, an elder nun arrives and showcases a holy nail relic taken from the cross on which Jesus was crucified. She places the nail on Cecilia's hand, and before Cecilia could react, she passes out. That night, Cecilia wakes up from a terrible nightmare and finds herself back in her room. Cecilia soon begins her training under Isabella and also befriends Gwen. One night, Cecilia is woken by an elderly nun who cuts a lock of her hair. Cecilia, however, stays calm and escorts her back to the ward when she notices cross-shaped scars under the nun's feet. One morning, Cecilia suddenly feels sick. She goes to the infirmary for tests. After the test results come back, Father Sal and several senior members of the community summon her for a serious discussion. She assures them fervently that she has not been involved with any man, but she's shocked to find she's pregnant despite being a virgin. They all call it a miracle. After the news spreads, the inhabitants of the convent start treating Cecilia as the next Virgin Mary. During her second trimester, Cecilia pukes out one of her teeth. One morning, while Cecilia is relaxing in the bath, Isabella tries to drown her out of jealousy and says it was supposed to be her. She's dragged away while Cecilia is rushed to the infirmary where they check if the baby is fine. Cecilia finds it weird that no one is concerned about her and the fact that Isabella tried to drown her. She asks Father Sal what Isabella meant by it was supposed to be her. Father Sal states that Isabella is facing mental issues, which probably prompted her to attack Cecilia. He assures her nothing of this sort will happen. Cecilia, however, is not convinced and asks to be taken to the hospital. But Father Sal denies her request, stating staying in the convent will be the best for the unborn savior. Cecilia is walking through the convent when she sees Isabella jump from the roof to her death. This all seems suspicious to Gwen, who talks to Cecilia. When Father Sal interrupts them, Gwen publicly chastises the convent superiors for turning a blind eye to the recent events, but she's dragged away by Father Sal and Deacon. Disturbed by what happened that day, Cecilia is unable to sleep and sits on her bed when suddenly the chain used to hang the painting of the Virgin Mary in her room comes loose. She notices 2 Corinthians 11:14 written on the wall behind the painting. Cecilia finds the verse in the Bible and gets spooked after reading the warning the nun has left behind, which clearly points out that there is something wrong with the convent. Cecilia decides to talk to Gwen about it, but not finding her in her room, Cecilia wanders into the office, where she finds her file and is shocked to see the news clippings of the accident from her childhood. She's going through the file when a woman's scream startles her. She follows the sound and reaches a locked door. Peeping through the keyhole, she witnesses Gwen tied to a chair and a masked nun cutting off her tongue. As she backs away, she is subdued by the older nun who previously cut a lock of her hair. The nun hands her a cross made out of it. Cecilia states she needs to leave, but the nun warns her that she can never leave the convent. Realizing what mess she's got herself into, Cecilia knows she needs to act fast. The next morning, everyone gets up to Cecilia's screams. They rush to her room to find her bleeding profusely. One of the senior nuns tries to call an ambulance, but Father Sal stops her and decides to drive Cecilia to the hospital himself, accompanied by Deacon. This plan might have worked for Cecilia had the senior nun not discovered the dead hen under Cecilia's bed, which Cecilia used to make it seem as if she was having a miscarriage. The senior nun immediately calls Father Sal to inform him of the deception. Left with no other choice, Cecilia makes a run for it. But pregnant and running don't go hand in hand unless one is a professional runner. As expected, she gets caught and is brought back to the convent where the senior nun reprimands and slaps her for her actions. To prevent her from running away again, Cecilia is tied to a wheelchair. When Father Sal meets her, she confronts him and asks what he did to her. Father Sal brings out the nail, supposedly used to crucify Jesus, and explains that it has blood, tissue, and basically the DNA of Jesus. He uses the DNA sample from the relic to impregnate nuns in the hopes of bringing the Messiah back. He wheels her to his laboratory where several deformed, preserved fetuses lie, the result of their past failures in his experimentation. But he's sure what Cecilia is nurturing is a success. He reveals he left his job as a geneticist because of the backlash he faced for his experimentation. But the convent allowed him to continue his madness in the name of blind faith. He then proceeds to brand Cecilia's feet with the cross similar to the one she saw on an elderly nun. After the incident, Cecilia is mostly confined in a room. Her health deteriorates even more in the third trimester as her fingernail becomes loose and she peels it off. With the day of the delivery approaching, Cecilia is in the infirmary getting her ultrasound when the doctor steps out, leaving her alone with a senior nun. Cecilia tries her luck one last time. She grabs the metal cross from the side table and attacks the senior nun, beating her face to a pulp. That's what you get for slapping her. As soon as she steps out, her water breaks, but she doesn't give up, and using her rosary, she strangles the cardinal, which the doctor sees, but he runs away because no one dares to mess with an angry pregnant woman. Cecilia grabs the cardinal's lighter and goes to the chapel to steal the nail relic. She then douses Father Sal's lab with ethanol. Just then he walks in and approaches her menacingly, but suddenly stops when he sees a lighter in her hand. Cecilia gets a contraction, and Father Sal takes the opportunity to try to grab the lighter from her, but Cecilia uses a glass flask and smashes it on his head before fleeing. She locks the door behind her, but Father Sal is persistent and grabs Cecilia by her hair. When he doesn't let go, she lights the lighter and throws it near her dress, where she sees traces of ethanol. The fire spreads, forcing Father Sal to let go of her hair as she screams in agony. Cecilia quickly puts off the fire on her dress and watches as the lab burns. However, just when another contraction comes, she is horrified to see Father Sal smash open the door, forcing her to run. She reaches the catacombs, where she finds Gwen's mutilated body. She runs from there and finds a hole in the wall leading to outside. She climbs the hole and is almost out when Father Sal drags her back inside once again and attempts to cut the baby out of her stomach. Cecilia cries in pain, but with all the energy she's got, she stabs Father Sal in the throat with the nail relic. She finally exits the catacombs and agonizingly gives birth. But when she sees the baby she's given birth to, she is horrified. Instead of crying, the creature growls. She bites off the umbilical cord and walks to get a rock, which she then uses to crush the thing to death, finally severing all ties to this hellish nightmare she has endured. That wraps up our horror movie recap of the movie Immaculate. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button to watch our awesome horror recaps of the latest horror movies and smash the bell icon so you never miss out on them.